right, welcome back. This is part three of a grant writing series um, focused on supporting agricultural producers and undergraduates with the idea of the more we talk to each other and understand the needs and interests of different groups of people, the better we can all work together and support our amazing local food system here in New Mexico. Um, so for this one, we've spent a couple of weeks thinking about getting prepared, and now we're actually going to dive into doing the work of doing the writing. But there's some tips that will hopefully help you. Um, so we're going to certainly continue to stay organized with any luck at all. There will be some things that are sort of repeated from previous weeks that we've been talking about. And then we're really going to make sure that we're doing everything we can, that the reviewers know that our project matches what they are looking for. There are some simple ways we can do that. And if we don't know that, we miss out on this opportunity to be really clear. And then speaking of that, there are just tips for clear writing. We weren't born, knowing how to write a novel. I mean, maybe some people are, but I think most people just work really hard at it and edit a lot. But there are things to look for. So you don't just have to know everything. There's a couple of things that I'll give you to look for that will hopefully help you make some decisions about editing your writing to be thoughtful and kind to your reader. That's where we're going. Here's where we've been. In the previous sessions, we have talked through having the idea, finding a funding source, just setting up the organization that you're going to use to keep yourself organized, reaching out with questions to the grant officer, starting to think of how the grant can even work. How much money do you have? What ideas do you have? Do those match together? Can you even do it in the time that there is available? Who can support you? What other partners do you need? We've gone through all of those things before we've even thought about trying to write the dang thing. And now it is time. We can't put it off any longer. We do have to actually write the grant. So we're going to work on drafting the proposal and editing. I will just say again, so few people can just write a masterpiece the first time. Most people who we think of as good writers are just really good editors. So don't be frustrated, or I invite you to consider not being frustrated if it doesn't quite sound right the first time. My first draft, I kind of won't even show it to people because it's pretty rough. But by the time I've edited it 3 or 4 times, it starts to sound pretty good. Okay, so we've done all of that, and now we can start writing the actual proposal. So we should have a pretty good idea from our deep read of the request for proposals. When I'm actually sitting down to write it, I usually have, I work with 2 screens, and I'll just have the request for proposals open on one screen, and then I will have my Word document or my Google Doc open on this other screen, just so I can keep cross-referencing them and just making sure that I'm not going sideways, and then we'll have to rewrite something extensively. But the thing I do when I have both documents open at the same time, I'm making an outline of the sections that they require, and I'm making notes to myself, usually using the notes function, or like the comment function of a Word document, of what kind of information needs to be included in each section. So here's an example. Again, you'll remember I'm putting page numbers. Like, it's hard to find this information sometimes. You got to dig. But here we go. So this proposal required a cover page. It told me it can't be longer than 1 page. And it told me all of the things that need to be in here. So even before I start writing something, I'm just going to copy that over to a document and make sure I don't miss anything. You'll remember, I've said this about 3 times already. You just don't want to be excluded from consideration because you forgot to include something. A complete proposal is the first step to getting funded, making sure you're not missing anything. So one way you can do that is to just have have your working document open, your RFP, and copy those over and make sure you don't miss anything. And then I often look for something like this. Sometimes they're very specific, with what kinds of typeface you're allowed to use, what size of font, or how big the margins are. If they give you that, make sure you follow it. And if they don't give it to you, I think I'll say this a couple more times, be kind to your reader. None of us want to read size 8 font crammed into an 8.5 by 11 page. We like white space. We like even margins. So even if they don't give it to you, I sort of suggest you go with a 12-point font in one of these more common typefaces. And then this will give you a total page number, right? So these are the kinds of things I'm keeping track of. Again, I'm trying to save myself time. I don't want to write 30 pages if I'm only allowed to submit 15. So I'm trying to keep myself efficient. All right. This is maybe one of my most useful tips. Use the exact words and phrases that the funder uses so the reviewer can easily find the information. So here's an example. The project description must include the following information in this order. They are being very clear about what they want to see and in what order. So what I will do in my open Word document is I will use underlined font and I will say project background. I may even label it 1. I may make it look exactly like this in my document. Item 2, project goals slash objectives. Item 3, project design and methods. I am just copying that exact language into my new open page, and then I'm filling out what I need in those sections. But I want to make sure that the reviewer's eye is drawn to the fact that I have not missed anything. And this is where you find that information. So I give an example right here. You might say, oh, well, design and methods is cumbersome. I'm going to write project implementation. But the downside of doing that is you're making your reviewer hunt and peck for the information they're looking for. If you can make it easier on the reviewer, they're more likely to score you highly. So can't emphasize enough. If they've given you a word or phrase, just use that word or phrase. It'll just make everyone's life easier. All right, so that's my sort of setup piece. This is step 8. We're drafting the proposal, matching the structure, and we're matching the language. So we want things in the right order, and we want the language to match the language that they used. Any chance that we have to match those. So now moving on to just sort of our general tips that I have come across. I've been teaching writing and been learning to write for a really long time. And again, I've said this a couple times. Our job is to make it easy for the reader. You want them sort of nodding along as you go. So, oh, that makes sense, right? We're not trying to be, there's different kinds of writing, right? There's poetry where you want the reader to be thinking and interpreting. Ideally, in great writing, you are being persuasive and you're trying to make it seem really obvious that your solution to this problem is a great solution and deserves to be funded. So we want to be really as obvious, complete, obvious, and succinct as possible. I'm just gonna say the best, if you have, especially if now you all have come to a couple of these, if you can have someone else read your writing, like I don't know if people on these calls want to exchange emails and go, hey, I'll read your proposal if you'll read mine and give each other some feedback. It is invaluable. And I'll talk a little bit more. If you don't have someone else to read your writing, there are ways, but make your teenage kid read over it. Ask your neighbor to read it. Anything you can get to get some feedback is going to be really helpful because they'll identify things that you overlook because all our brains are different, which is wonderful. If you have somebody like me read it, you kind of have to find the right person. I tend to give a lot of comments, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. But anyway, find a good person to read your writing. Great. So here we go. I just wanted to give a quick note on so many people, especially in New Mexico, English is not a first language. So many of the grants that I see are required to be submitted in English. This is the system we have at the moment. I hope that this system changes so that there is broader access. But unfortunately, I mostly see grants that have to be submitted in written English. I will say there are some grantors that are starting to change this. There are some people that ask for a short video. You could even record a selfie talking about your project. And so you're not required to do the writing part. I have seen very few grants that's, for example, Spanish is a language that you could submit your final proposal in. And so, like I said, I hope that this starts to change. But the context is most of what I see is required to be submitted in English. I'll also say I have seen reviewers who will put, I think, very inappropriate comments suggesting that people needed to be revised by a native English speaker. That is unfortunately still a phrase that I will see when I'm looking at reviews. I hope that changes also. That to me, we should not be making decisions based on people's, I don't know, comfort with written English. We should be looking at their ideas and the structure of their grant. But I will just say it's something I have noticed, and hopefully together we can change the system and make it more inclusive and accessible to people. So if you have the opportunity to be a reviewer, please keep that in mind, that if people have really good ideas and some of the grammar or some of the sentence structure feels different than how you would say it, if you understand it, I feel like that's what we should aim for. So I just wanted to sort of counter, because I'm giving a lot of tips for clear English writing, but I also want to say I don't want to prioritize that above people expressing themselves the way they want to express themselves. And I hope that our system changes so that that can be expressed in other languages and still have access to grants. So again, a shout out for SARE. They are providing some resources in Spanish, information about their grants. They are among the first that I have seen to do that. So, all right. So now, given that we are still trying to be kind to our readers, and hopefully all of us are trying to improve the clarity of our writing, whether English is a first, second, third, or fourth language, I would say if you have the option for how you would frame your entire, I don't know about you, but usually the first sentence is the hardest one to write, right? It's like, I can talk about the details in the middle, no problem, right? I can say, well, I need a no-till drill and I need this much seed and here's why and here's what I think is going to happen. But that's like the middle, right? it's the very first paragraph that's always so hard to write because you have to sort of bring people into your world and you have to like get them comfortable with what are we even talking about? Are we on a crop system or are we on a rangeland? Are we talking about agroforestry or are we talking about microbes, right? Like we need to sort of figure out where we are in the universe as the like before we dive into the details. So, how do you bring people into your universe? I have found that a solid strategy, all else, if you have another strategy, great. If you don't have a better idea, try starting with this one. See how it feels. Paragraph 1, that hardest paragraph to write, start with the really big picture. What is the shared context that we all agree on? And why is it important? So I'm going to do a totally fake made up example, but I hope we can all agree the sky is blue. When the sky is blue, that indicates that the air is pretty healthy for us to breathe. It's not always true, but for the sake of this example, the sky is blue. I think we can all agree on that. We can look outside. It's something that we all sort of have shared context of. And why is it important? It's because that tells us that it's healthy, right? There's some meaning to that. It's not just the sky is blue for the sake of the sky being blue. There's something that's important to our society. And then in the second paragraph, I would say, okay, here's that shared context. We're all sort of nodding along. Yes, I feel comfortable that the sky is blue. But what is the problem? What is currently going on? And because you have already said that that thing is important, hopefully the reader goes, oh, well, this problem is therefore important. So for example, in this totally made up example, you might say, paragraph 2, unfortunately, the sky is turning yellow and is therefore less healthy for us to breathe, right? You've set up that everybody knows the sky is supposed to be blue. You've set up a problem statement. Cool. And then in your third paragraph, you're briefly going to mention how do you propose to address that problem? What is the solution that you are proposing? What is unique and awesome? And how can you do it within the budget and time scale of the grant, right? So you are sort of summarizing all of your details into how you're addressing the problem. And so for my totally made up example, right, there are actually many, many possible solutions. And that's what reviewers have to weigh through. They have to weigh through all these awesome ideas that are related to a problem, and they have to pick which one they want to fund. And so, these two made up examples, we propose to deploy thousands of hot air balloons that are blue so that the sky looks blue again. Or we propose to train teenagers to ride bikes instead of drive to address urban air pollution. So I hope this example exemplifies that there are many possible solutions to problems. Would any of you, of those two options, which would you prefer to fund? Which one do you think is actually going to address the problem? And so this is, of course, a really extreme example, right? But if you think of getting, if there are different proposals that are proposing slightly different things, this is what the reviewer has to do. Like, you all are being reviewers and you are picking which of these two proposals you might fund. It sounds like right now, if there were two proposals, proposal 2 would be more likely to get funded because the solution is matching the problem, right? So this option 1, it is a solution, but it doesn't address the problem, right? And because we have set up the big context with a problem, we want our solution to address the problem. This option 1 does not address the problem, which is that it's unhealthy. It only addresses the context that the sky is blue. Mm. All right. So if you get through these three paragraphs, you're gold. You can go on to talk about your nitty-gritty because you have spent the time bringing the reader into your universe and telling them why it's important. And then they're usually much more likely to follow along with you as you go into the nitty-gritty. Um, I'm gonna say, so for that big picture, right? Usually, sorry, come back up here. For this big picture, usually it will be more than a sentence, right? It will be a paragraph. You'll talk about it and you'll give some evidence. Same with paragraph 2. What's the problem? You'll usually want to have some evidence that it's truly a problem, right? And so different contexts are going to have different expectations of how you demonstrate and how you support your arguments. So I'm just going to say that out loud. Many producers are unlikely to put in a scientific research proposal by themselves. By all means, go for it. I would be happy to help you. But that's a little less likely. And mainly because if you don't have access to an academic library, you probably don't have access to the journal articles that are going to be expected, right? So peer-reviewed publications, those are the journal articles that often have a paywall in front of them. You can't always get to them. But someone like me who's at a university, if I put in a proposal and I didn't include these peer-reviewed papers, I would not have justified my problem statement well. On the other hand, implementation or demonstration proposals, you may reference some literature, but you might also rely on things like a government or a nonprofit report. So I just stuck this one in here. If you have never dug into the Agricultural Statistics Bulletin, this is fascinating. This is where you can get information on like what is the average acreage of New Mexico rangelands? What is the average pounds of beef or dairy produced, right? It can give you that context, right? If what you're trying to do is, I propose to change how we support honeybee production in New Mexico. Currently, there's only 5 producers, and most of it's being exported out of state. And with my project, I'm going to double the number of producers, and all of it's going to stay in state, right? If you can give some of that context, it's going to be really compelling and really exciting for the reader. You want the reader to be excited about your project. So I'll try to pull together a couple more of the ones that I sort of my go-tos. At this point, they're so go-to that I couldn't even think of them all. But this is a really good one. And those come out every 2 years. So the next one will be out in about a year. I'm gonna say if industry data or projections, I tend to treat those with a grain of salt. So if, Acme Corps says, well, my machine will increase wheat production by 400%, and here's all the data to back that up, they may have that data, but I do tend to treat that with a grain of salt. I usually try to find someone else, an independent reference to back that up, or to simply say, this is an industry source and needs to be verified. I was unable to verify this. So I don't think it's wrong to say, we are using this brand of fertilizer because they guarantee a yield increase of 20%. That's fine. I would just say treat it with a grain of salt. Just be thoughtful of where you're getting your information and what they're selling. So I don't think it's wrong. Just be thoughtful about it. And then last is, unfortunately, and this is again me sort of reporting out what I have seen in the world, that unfortunately traditional knowledge or storytelling or anecdote, it can be discounted by reviewers, that they are not going to find that as compelling as using data that's published in mainstream scientific evidence-based outlets. I think that's changing. I think it should change. But I just want you all to know, if your project is so important that you need it to get funded, you may consider pairing traditional knowledge or anecdote or storytelling with another form of knowledge source, another source of knowledge to back that up. If you are interested in pushing and changing the system and you want to have the integrity that the traditional knowledge or the story is its own form of knowledge, which it is, you would be pushing some boundaries on some funders if you were doing that. And I just want people to know what the trade-offs might be. Some reviewers, I have seen evidence that some reviewers discount that source of knowledge and information, which again, hopefully will change. And it will very much depend on the funder. Some people will actually emphasize like what are stories or anecdotes from your community that support your proposal, right? So it really does depend. And that without even figuring that out, that is where some of those letters of support that you asked for in the first week, this is where that can really be supported, that you have different kinds of data and these different organizations or these different people have stories or experiences that back that up. So I think there are ways to bring these different sources of knowledge into your proposal. And I would just say for if you want a really compelling proposal, bringing in many sources of knowledge to justify your project or your problem is perhaps going to be more compelling for the reader. All right. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. Back to general tips for clear writing. So if you all are having flashbacks to middle school, and I don't know, my mom actually got like hit on the knuckles by nuns when she would do grammatically incorrect sentences. Luckily, I did not experience that. But if you're having some flashbacks of some challenging experiences, I am here to tell you, you were probably right all along. Grammatically correct writing is not the same as clear writing. So for example, which of these two sentences, A or B, and again, put it in the chat, do you think is clearer? Which one is more clear? Which one is more obvious of what they're trying to say? So these two sentences are grammatically correct. Both of them are grammatically correct. I would argue, and many, so far we have evidence that several people find B a little bit clearer. It's just easier to read. And there are some reasons. As humans, we tend to like people doing the action. So putting a person, we lost the election, we tend to find that easier to read. And then I'll get into a couple of others. So grammatically correct is not equal clear writing. You could put either of these sentences into your proposal and they would both be correct. But you may choose to pick one over the other so that the reader has an easier time understanding the concepts. I also want to say you can absolutely break grammar rules if you do so intentionally and it has a desired effect. I also put an asterisk there. I've had copy editors who I just gave fits because I refused to change some of my sentence structure, even though it wasn't grammatically correct, and it just gave them fits. So, you know, it's a conversation. But for example, children need to eat, period, and children need to feel safe. That is a punchy pair of sentences, right? Like that has a big effect. And it might be different than children need to eat and children need to feel safe, right? We're creating a feeling, we're creating emotion with our writing, and we can do that really intentionally. So just wanted to say you can break rules, just do so very intentionally. All right. General tips for clear writing. Let verbs be verbs. We often try to make them into nouns. But here's another pair. A was there was an affirmative decision for expansion. B is the director decided to expand the program. The beautiful thing about verbs is they move, like you can sort of see action happening in the world. So a decided, I decided to go to Spain is different. It feels different than my decision was to go to Spain. It feels more passive, right? There's just the way humans use language and the way we operate in the world, we like to do things. We like to see actions happening in the world, and we can do that with how we choose our language. I will say, oh, I forgot to give the shout out of this book. Highly recommend. It's got like 20 versions. You can find previous editions for like $15 online. The new version is like $80. So I wouldn't, if you want to spend $80, buy the newest edition. But all of the editions are great. And all of these tips, anytime I have this book icon over here, these tips are coming from this book. So if this is really messing with your head and you want to go a little bit deeper, this book is really helpful to start training your brain to look for some of these, like the difference between decision and decided, expansion and expand. There's some exercises to practice that. So this book, this book changed my life. So if it is helpful to you, I certainly hope you can go out and find it. All right, so let verbs be verbs. And then the subjects of the sentence doing the action. So here's our next voting opportunity. Here's A, is a walk through the woods was taking place on the part of Red Riding Hood. B, Red Riding Hood walked through the woods. Again, these are both grammatically correct. And it's amazing. Even though I know these rules, I will still sneak into, like, I think especially undergrads will try to sound fancier than they need to. I have learned like it's not worth it to try to sound fancy. Sounding really clear and direct often serves me better. All right. Couple of other general tips. Topic sentences of paragraphs can really help the reader. So for example, I have not actually been doing this for this part of this talk, but I have given you topic sentences sort of in how I guide you through what we're doing on this agenda, right? Basically, this outline is a set of topic sentences, and then I go more into detail of every one of them. But hopefully it's helpful when I give you the topic sentence to know that everything else relates to that topic sentence. So some people, I think this really depends on your method. Some people will write the details of the paragraph and then write the topic sentence that sort of encapsulates what they wrote. That can work. You can sometimes get too many things into your paragraph if you do it that way. You can have ideas that don't really relate to each other. Many other people will write their topic sentences first, basically as like the bullet point outline, right? If you have a bullet point outline, then you write your topic sentences, and then you fill in the details afterwards. So you make sure that there's one main idea per paragraph. But I will let you all explore. Different people have different ways of doing this. But I would say it's certainly easier for a reader to, again, get that, like, let's bring them into the world. This paragraph, we're going to talk about cover crops. Here's the important thing about cover crops and why it's relevant to New Mexico. Versus if I just start and I say, I'm anticipating needing 423 pounds of seed for the next 3 years for cover cropping. Whoa, why? How did that relate to the idea before? Like it can feel abrupt. That change can feel abrupt, and readers don't like to feel like they don't know where they are, right? They like to feel sort of guided on the pathway between the ideas. And anything we can do to say, hey, remember that thing we talked about? Here's the next step. And now here's the details. So anytime we can do that, there's, as you can tell, I use lots of imagery. We're walking people along a path or that sort of thing. All right. Topic sentences, good luck. They are very challenging. If you remember having to do this in previous writing classes, you'll remember it's a little bit challenging and you can also get better at it. All right, pick an order and use the exact order throughout. This is a much easier thing to tackle than to try to do topic sentences. If my deliverables are a webinar, a paper, and a podcast, and there's a reason that I've picked that order, I am going to say that order every time I mention them. That's the order that I'm going to talk about them in the budget narrative. That's the order that I'm going to talk about them in the timeline. I'm just going to reduce the mental load of the reviewer changing order. I'm just going to keep it in the same order. It also helps you not forget something. I have definitely written up a grant and then went back to edit, and I noticed that I had missed writing about one of my deliverables because I switched the order. And when I went back with an eye to, ooh, is everything in the same order every time? I noticed that I had missed writing about something. And I know a reviewer would have been like, hey, what happened to that podcast? You didn't write about it in the budget narrative. So this can be really helpful for you. Pick an order and stick to it. And then it's really helpful for the reader because they know what to expect. You've set up a pattern and you maintain that pattern. Right? My last tip, and this is kind of funny for many people who work with government agencies. I would say avoid abbreviations whenever possible. And that is not the world we live in with USDA and NRCS and FSA and NMDA and all of that. But it is certainly easier. It's like less mentally fatiguing for us to just write out the words and read the words. So it will feel repetitive to you. But the reader, you have to remember the reader hasn't thought as much about this as you have. And so, for example, if I say RFP, does anyone remember what I meant by RFP? I did talk about it earlier, but right, when you just see it in a new circumstance, it's hard to remember what that means versus if I just said, the reader doesn't remember what request for proposals is. Our brains just like the words. So if you can, just write it out every time. So that is just a tip. I recommend that. All right. So we've written a draft. We need to go back and make sure it makes sense. Because sometimes, I don't know, I'll write something and I'm like, that was great. And then I go back and read it a second time and I go, well, this doesn't really make sense. And then you also need to look for things like typos, right? You want to have a polished, complete thing. Unfortunately, our brains are very good at filling in information that's missing. So here's this example down here. Can anyone tell me what this says? Right? Our brains fill in information. We take what we have and we get it pretty close, right? So when we're editing, when we're figuring out if it makes sense, if we're looking for typos, I sort of argue we need to trick ourselves into reading more carefully and doing more work. Our brains are trying to get through this quickly and easily, and our brains are really good at it, as we just saw. Thank you. So there are some tricks. If you were here the first week, Katie mentioned reading out loud, read your proposal out loud. You can often like hear something that sounds wrong versus just reading it on a page. I have a friend of mine from grad school has figured out how to make his phone or his computer read it out loud to him, which is pretty interesting. And so you could try that. This is one that won't make sense right off the bat. I'll find a example. The thing that I do is I will read my documents. I'll read the last paragraph from top to bottom, but then I'll read the second to last paragraph from top to bottom, and then I'll read the third to last paragraph from top to bottom. And it's again, it's just meant to disrupt the patterns in my brain, and try to notice if something is either a typo or is unclear. So there are a couple of different ways. However you can not just sort of nod along with your own writing, is probably a good way of trying that. We haven't done that yet, Katie, but we will in just a second. I think this is my last slide, so then we can chat a bit more. Oh no, almost second to last slide. All right. So I just wanted to put this in here. I've never had to write it or had to talk about this before, since the artificial intelligence is relatively new technology. I don't know a lot about artificial intelligence. I think there's a lot that a lot of people don't know. But I do know that there are people using AI for things like reducing the page or word count, right? Let's say you accidentally wrote 18 pages, but you have to get it down to 15 pages. You may ask AI to help you do that, to help you consolidate. You should certainly double check whatever the output is, right? Because that may get a little crazy, not exactly what you want. Okay. You may use AI to check grammar. I think there's a lot of the jury is out about how effective AI is for translating between languages. But I think, lots of these things will change very rapidly. And so I just wanted to point out that there are these tools. Like every tool, we need to use it appropriately. If the funder has guidance for how to use artificial intelligence, please do follow it. If not, and you choose to use artificial intelligence for some part of your proposal preparation, I suggest just attributing that in some part of your document. I used ChatGPT to help me reduce the page count, and just be really transparent, because right now there's so little guidance that I think it's sort of on us to behave ethically around artificial intelligence. So I would check. This is something you could ask the program officer about if there is guidance. But I thought it was very important to say this because it is happening, and whether we like it or not, this is a tool that's out there. So we should have some awareness of how it's being used, how it can help us, and then what we need to do to use it ethically. All right. So we have written, we have edited, we're thinking about submitting, but we should cross-check. So often there will be in the request for proposals some indication of what the review and selection process looks like. So in this case, application will be screened for completeness and compliance. That's me, the broken record. Make sure your proposal is complete. If it's not complete, it doesn't even make it past this first stage. That's a screening step. You have to get a complete proposal even to go to review. There we go. Incomplete, non-compliant, or application is not meeting the formatting criteria may be eliminated from competition, right? So let's say you, in your word processor, you got the proposal down to 15 pages. You uploaded it into that portal that the grant has, and for some reason it changed the formatting and it's now 16 pages. If you miss that, your proposal is going to be excluded, even though on your version it was 15 pages. You've got to cross-check that how it goes to the funder meets their requirements. It's on you, right? So in that event, the agency will send notification of elimination to the applicant. All right. So then often they'll talk about the merit or technical criteria. And in this case, they have a 100-point scale. And then they'll tell you what they're looking for. This is when their reviewers are reading your proposal, this is what they're looking for. The purpose is clearly explained, the goals and objectives are clearly stated, the rationale is explicit. So all of these things are telling me there's some really key words here. I want to make sure that in my proposal, the word purpose is probably bolded or highlighted. I want to say the goals and objectives are probably another bolded or highlighted aspect of my proposal. And rationale is maybe also a word that's bolded. That means my reviewers can very clearly see that I've met these needs. All right. Oops. All right. The project outcomes are stated, measurable and likely to be achieved. Does this harken back to our SMART goals from last week, perhaps? But we might want to say something like, how do we measure our outcomes, right? Like, make it as obvious as possible for the reviewer to find that you have met this criteria, right? And then in this case, the other tip is, if you are running out of time, I would say look at the merit and technical criteria, spend the most amount of time on the sections that give you the most points, right? So if if the purpose, approach, and goals is 25 points, and then the technology is only 10 points, it's definitely more worth your time to spend the time on the 25-point section. You're more likely to get funded if you do a better job on that part than on the part that's worth less points. So again, I've said this a bunch of times, I try to be efficient grant writing. I don't want to spend time on things that aren't going to be worth my time. All right, so we have made it through yet again. Just quickly, we have just drafted the proposal, and I hope I have sounded like a broken record. Using the language that the funder puts in their RFP is a really good strategy. And then hopefully I've given you a couple of tips for how you could edit, what you can look for to make sure that your language is clear. In our next session, we will talk about the submission portal and making sure that we didn't miss anything. And we'll also talk about the budget narrative. Next, we will also next week talk about a tiny bit what to do if you do get funded. Yay! There is a lot more to do to just support yourself to actually get to do the project. We will also talk about what to do if you are not funded, because unfortunately, if you'll remember from the first session, that is a very likely outcome, is that you don't get funded this first time.